it's me, BRANE. I'm gonna talk about converting shaders you can find on shadertoy.com to Godot's shading language. So we are going to go through the process of taking a shader from here and translating it to something like this here. I've chosen this shader as I wasn't too happy with the water in the game I'm working on. It's a fairly complex shader to translate to Godot, so we'll cover a lot of stuff. I'm no expert on shaders by any means, and I just tried to learn enough for me to translate them to Godot successfully. The best place to start from is the lovely Godot documentation. There's already a part of it dedicated to this issue. Basically, all we need is this, and some programming knowledge to figure stuff out to translate this shader. So let's start. The algorithm is like this. Copy it over to Godot and hope for the best. If something's wrong, figure out why it's wrong, fix it and start from number 1. I won't go into details of what these functions do, mainly because I have no idea. What I will focus on is the thought process behind the successful translation from shadertoy.com to Godot. So let's start by making a new scene in Godot. Okay, we have our new scene. Let's add the container. And in our container we want a color rectangle. We're going to set our layout to full rectangle. Let's set our container to full rectangle too. And we are going to apply our shader on this color rectangle. So let's add a material. It's going to be a shader material and our new shader. After we added our shader, we immediately have a mistake. We need to have a shader type. Well, if you go through the documentation on Godot's webpage, you're going to see that there are 3 shader types, and the one that we are going to use is the canvas item. It's for 2D stuff. We are going to copy over this function, smooth noise. Let's see if we are going to have errors. We are going to hope for the best. So we have an error. It says we need a semicolon. We're going to add it here. So now the problem is here. We have a point after 3, that's 3.0, and if we write it like this, there is no error anymore. And here we have a bigger issue that's harder to recognize what the problem is. Now we have invalid arguments to operator multiplication vector with 4 components and an integer. The problem is actually here, because we are multiplying with an integer. This number here is actually 10,000. I had issues with understanding what that means, but that is 10 to the power of 5. So here we have a problem. It says invalid arguments for built-in function mat2 of vector 4. So this is a matrix 2 times 2. We can't supply a vector 4 to it, which we are doing here. And to fix that, we are going to take this vector with 4 components and split it into 2 vectors with 2 components. So let's do this. Vector with 4 components, and it's going, let's call it val for value. The same error is happening. But if we split it to 2 vectors with 2 components, we don't have an error anymore. So let's go to the number 1 in our algorithm again. It's copy over and hope for the best. Okay, we are going to erase everything that's not necessary. So here we have again invalid numeric constants. Usually it's this. You have to add zeros where dots are, and now we don't have issue. Well, we were hoping for the best and it went good this time. Next, we need to script the warp noise. Here we have some issues we haven't had before. We have unknown identifier itime. Well, if we go to the Godot's documentation, we have this part of the documentation that's called migration to Godot shader language, and it even has a part for Shadertoy. And if we scroll down and we look for this table, it says itime is actually time in Godot. So let's copy that over. We do this, and there's another issue. It says unknown identifier in expression time. That happens because time all caps time is recognized only in the main function of our shader that we are going to write next. So instead of this, we are going to pass the time variable through the function. So we are going to have a float value named time here, and we are going to pass that time variable in our main function when we call this warped noise function. And we don't have any more issues. That's awesome. Now the main function remains. Copy it over, and because our main function doesn't need out and in values, it's just main function that's called fragment in Godot. Okay, and now we need to translate these variables here. Let's delete the comments. So it says frag chord, and if we look at the table in Godot's documentation, frag chord is actually frag chord all caps. Let's copy it over, and resolution is actually 1 divided by screen pixel size. Okay, let's put that in braces so we can extract the y value from it. Now we have the similar issues with the numeric constant. Okay, when we fix this, we have another issue. It says no matching function found for warped noise. Well, that's because our warped noise has to have a time float variable too. So we need to pass the time now from our fragment function, because here Godot recognizes what time is. Let's add the zeros where they need to be. And now the last line of our code. Let's delete the comments for clarity. Flag color is actually color. Okay, now we have this problem. So it says invalid numeric constant. We already know how to fix that. And the last problem we have is an invalid arguments for built-in function max that receives a vector with 3 components and a float. Well, we can intuitively conclude that max returns the bigger of the two values passed here, and it can't compare a vector to float in Godot shading language. Well, we can have this to help it out. We are going to convert this float to a vector with 3 components that have zeros, and that's all we need to do to have this shader here. So in Godot it looks like this, and in Shadertoy it looks like this, almost the same, and I think it looks lovely. Well, for water we need to customize it, so we are going to add some values to make it a little bit nicer. In the end, my game went from this to this, and I think that's a great improvement. It's even too realistic for my game currently, but that's something I'm gonna tackle later. And that's it for this video. Leave a comment if you have any questions. Cheers!